Today, Christians face increasing pressure to agree with harmful secular ideologies about race, sexuality, human identity, and more. At the Colson Center, we seek to help Christians live with courageous faith, stand on truth, and speak that truth with love. To support the ministry of the Colson Center as we approach the end of the year, make a gift today at colsoncenter.org/upyearend. Welcome to Upstream, where we make your worldview bigger and older by taking hard questions to the headsprings of Christian wisdom. I'm Shane Morris. In my favorite of his songs, Andrew Peterson asks a simple question: don't you want to thank someone? Surveying this world of rolling thunder, sighing babies, singing birds, pouring rain, running horses, mothers' kisses, and everything that goes right in spite of all that's wrong, Peterson assumes, as we should, that the listener is moved to gratitude, even if they don't know who to thank. As we ready ourselves to celebrate Thanksgiving, that most American of holidays, we acknowledge that impulse to gratitude. Many of us are looking forward to feasting and time with family. But why feasting? Why pleasures and gifts of the table and others' company? Why devote attention to these things if the goal is simply to turn our hearts back to God? Wouldn't it be more straightforward simply to go to church and worship Him? Shouldn't a day celebrating the generosity of Jesus actually be a day in which the things of earth, in the words of another famous song, grow strangely dim? Well, this tension is one I've found a surprising number of Christians struggle with, especially at times like Thanksgiving, when God and His pleasant gifts are stubbornly integrated rather than placed in opposition, as they can so quickly be just a day or even hours later. Joining me today is someone who has helped me, more than just about any other author, to think clearly about thankfulness to God for His many good gifts. Dr. Joe Rigney is a longtime professor and former president of Bethlehem College and Seminary. He now serves as a fellow of theology at New St. Andrews College. He's a husband, father of 3, and the author of several books, including my favorite, a 10-year-old gem called The Things of Earth: Treasuring God by Enjoying His Gifts. He was also my first ever guest on Upstream, and his return has been long overdue. Joe, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. I'd forgot that I was the first. That's awesome.
It was a perfect selection, not only because of, I think it was Strangely Bright that we talked about, which is sort of like the Reader's Digest version of Things of Earth, but it was also perfect because you're such a Narnian, right? And you teach people how to live like a Narnian. And anyone who's listened to Upstream for the past, like 230 plus episodes will be able to tell you now that we frequently refer to C.S. Lewis. In fact, I'm told there's a kind of like Upstream bingo game where how many minutes will pass before Shane drops a C.S. Lewis reference. So
that's right. That's good.
It's a natural return.
They'll hopefully they'll get some they'll get bingo this time.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your Thanksgiving plans first of all, because we're like situating this as a Thanksgiving thing. I know this is a time of special importance and tradition for many people.
Yeah. Well, this year, we just moved out here to Moscow, so this will be our first Thanksgiving out here in Moscow. And I know my wife and a couple of other ladies in the community here have been talking about getting together. So because we won't have family up in this part of the world. We had some family in Minnesota, we got family in Texas, but we won't be with them for Thanksgiving. So we'll be doing it here and trying to establish new rhythms and traditions in a new house. But we always look forward to it.
I think my favorite thing about Thanksgiving, other than the just sort of, atmosphere of it, which evokes a lot of that Lewisian joy, is the fact that it's so uncorrupted. If you survey American holidays and you look at how they've been like twisted and commercialized, it seems like Thanksgiving is the one that I guess the capitalists haven't quite figured out how to like mess up. And I say that as a thoroughgoing capitalist, but boy, does Christmas get screwed up. And, but Thanksgiving seems like there's something wholesome that stays with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the way that I think it's actually in danger. This is actually interesting. I actually think Thanksgiving is in danger precisely because of basically what I'll call the Xmas creep. So not Christmas, meaning the Christian holiday that we celebrate the birth of Jesus, but Lewis, here you go. C.S. Lewis called it Xmas, this other thing that happens about the same time, but is a totally different deal. So I think I'll in a couple around Thanksgiving, around sometime in Christmas, I've got an article at Desiring God will come out on Lewis on Xmas. But one of the things about Thanksgiving, the way it fits, is that sort of the Xmas holiday, meaning this commercialized racket that run by an Eastern syndicate, as the Peanuts cartoons used to say, basically is bookended by Thanksgiving on the front end, Black Friday, Thanksgiving, and then on the back end, it's Bowl Week. So it's football at both ends. You've got Thanksgiving Day, you've got the football on Fridays in Thanksgiving, and then you've got bowl week. And that's Xmas. Xmas runs all through there. What the American system has done is taken this Christian holiday, Thanksgiving established as an American holiday, but a Christian one. We think give thanks to God for all of his provision, and is sort of co-opted as the front end. And so you have then Black Friday, which is literally a holiday. Like they invented a holiday about making sure that the retailers get back in the black. Like they're like, let's just be honest about what this is. We're in the red. We need to get in the black, so we'll just make a holiday and have a bunch of discounts. And then they've just started to build on it. So you got Black Friday, then you get Small Business Saturday. I don't know if everybody does that all over the place, but I know in Minnesota at least for years it was Small Business Saturday.
That is the most like Jeb Bush-esque please clap thing ever.
Yeah, right.
Like Small Business Saturday.
Yeah, well, what it was is all of the big retailers run all the big deals. Everybody's having it's like a bar fight in Walmart over the TV, and then and the small businesses were like, well, hey, we want to get in on that, and so hey, go support a small business on Saturday, and then you got Cyber Monday when all of the online retailers are like, hey, us too, we want to make sure we get in on this cash cow, and then Giving Tuesday. There's now a thing. It's called Giving Tuesday. And I think that Wednesday ought to be like Repenting Wednesday because look at all, but like it's not, we haven't got there yet. But it is kind of like an American Holy Week where, and I think that the danger of it for Thanksgiving, back to Thanksgiving, is just like Christmas has sort of been co-opted. Now you don't really celebrate Advent. There's no run up to the Christmas holiday. There's no season of expectation awaiting. It's all Christmas rush from Black Friday to Christmas Day, and everybody's in a frenzy, and you've got all of the rush of it, the burden of the rush. And so it's not expectation and it's not celebration anymore. I think a similar thing is in danger of being swallowed on the Thanksgiving side too, where it's, basically Thanksgiving is the preparation for all the shopping on Black Friday through Cyber Monday. Like it's just, you got you're fueling up, which sort of fundamentally distorts, I think the holiday, which is meant to draw us both to our family, our neighbors. It's the feast thing, but also to God. And it's really hard to do that if what you're really thinking about is, hey, are we going to be able to make the big Friday sales next day?
It almost feels like we need a Peanuts episode mirroring the one they did for Christmas. It's like, can't anyone tell me what Thanksgiving is all about?
What is Thanksgiving all about?
Because the actual Peanuts episode for Thanksgiving is like they go to the Plymouth colony and do the whole thing with the Pilgrims, which is great. But yeah, it doesn't really tackle the creeping commercialization, Xmissification, if we could coin a phrase of Thanksgiving. That's very good. So as we sit and try to have something that approximates a God honoring holiday, we find ourselves indulging in a great deal of the culinary delights that are traditional to the holiday. I know you have a favorite dessert. I've got a favorite. Mine's pecan pie, and the turkey and everything. It's a wonderful opportunity to enjoy things in the most earthy way possible. But there's this tension that exists in the minds of many Christians. And 10 years ago, you wrote this remarkable book, Things of Earth, to tackle or deal with that sort of tension that many people feel. Can you kind of explain what that is and why you felt like this is important to write about and why it's still important to think about?
Yeah, sure. So, the basic, where it came from in my own life was having cut my teeth in Young, Restless, and Reformed, in high school or late high school, early college, and been a part of all of that. The sort of the new Calvinist recovery of the supremacy of God. John Piper is one of the seminal influences on my life. And so the Bible broke open because of the supremacy of God. Your deepest satisfaction should be found in God. And that was sort of, and I think, Piper's ministry was itself a kind of response to what you might call both easy believism, where faith is just check a box, and a kind of duty-driven, you don't actually have to delight in God, just do the right thing. So he was writing into that context and trying to lift and a kind of an American consumerism, easy Christianity sort of thing. And he's trying to say, no, you really have to delight in God. God is the most glorious being in the universe, and he's your deepest satisfaction. God is most glorified and we're most satisfied. So John was writing into that context. So it broke open for me. And then it sort of then created other problems, which is, okay, now if God's the sun at the center of the solar system, does he just burn everything up? Like, do all of the other things, do all of the planets the created planets, the created goods, what happens to them now if he's the blazing center of everything? Living in Minneapolis from about 2005 until recently, there's about an eight-year period in the run up to Things of Earth where this was kind of a front burner question for me. I was newly married. We had kids. Our first two kids were born at that time, and it was kind of like, man, these gifts are really potent. What are they? How do I bring these together? How do you love God supremely, and how do you enjoy His gifts rightly without committing idolatry, without elevating them too highly, but also not like rejecting them or stiff arming them or keeping them at arm's length out of some fear, pious fear that they're going to usurp God's place? Is there a way to actually do it right? And so that's where the book came from.
It's the I'm enjoying it too much syndrome. It's the maybe I love my spouse too much. I enjoy food too much. I like nature and time outside too much.
Too much, yeah, right. And I think that's the important thing is, too much is this really vague standard. So what it does is it leaves you with just a general guilty vibe. Like there's just a guilty mood that just hangs on you because I'm not loving God enough, whatever that means, and I'm loving the things of earth too much, whatever that means. But it's never defined, and so you there's no way to actually deal with this. It's just you feel bad because you can't. You're human. You're going to live in the world. You're going to be here, and God did establish. Look at all the good things in your life, and so you're just going to live with this low-grade guilt. And that was really the problem that is that low-grade guilt was the thing that I was like, there's got to be a better way. And between Piper and Jonathan Edwards and Doug Wilson and C.S. Lewis, that's kind of the things that brought together for me a number of different elements that pointed me back to the scriptures to go, oh, here's how we can thread this needle.
This is the tension you see Lewis sort of dealing with, especially in Weight of Glory, where he opens with that whole contrast between unselfishness and charity. And he's not picking on like medieval ascetics. So I would love to hear your take on that kind of very old impulse that Christians have to just denounce even good things of the world and sort of run into the wilderness and be a monk, right? But Lewis does this great thing where he points out that older Christians valued charity, which is the old word for love, divine love, agape. They did not value mere denial of good things or making yourself miserable, which is what we typically mean by unselfishness. So we have this bizarre idea that there's some kind of virtue in just the self-flagellation of making yourself unhappy or denying yourself something or denying other people things. But there actually is no virtue in that. It's only an instrumental good in order to enable you to give, to pursue something good or to give somebody else the love that they were created for. So comment, if you would, on what Lewis is doing there, and then how your project differed a little bit or worked based off of that. And then we can get into that old ascetic habit of Christians.
Lewis in Weight of Glory is trying to wrestle with, it's the mud pies in the slum. Are you going to be satisfied with mud pies in the slums when a holiday see it offered you? And that was a quote, Piper regularly used that in his sort of base Christian hedonist messages, as sort of don't be satisfied with two-bit, half-hearted, sinful pleasures, or even good earthly pleasures. You got to go to the fountain. You got to go to the sea, the fountain of joy in God Himself. And that's an absolutely essential point. And it's fundamental. It's where Things of Earth starts. It assumes that, teaches that, and acknowledges that. And then says, now we need to carry that through. Is it the case that these things, because Lewis in that essay, that sermon, also talks about the way that, the glory of God sort of comes through the created order in nature and in fellowship and in all of these sort of images, and that basically we hear the echo in them of something deeper, and we want to chase it back and find where's that joy coming from. This was Lewis's sort of quest, is all of the joy would come to him through music or through the Norse mythology, or all these different things would sort of be means of striking that note of joy. And then he was like, but where's it coming from? And what he didn't do was then say, well, all of these things are bad. He recognized that these are the things that God uses. God reveals Himself in the things that have been made. That's the sort of base biblical insight of Things of Earth, is the Romans 1 point of God's invisible attributes are made manifest, are revealed in the things that have been made. Made things make invisible attributes visible, which means all of these made things are invitations. God's saying, come find me, come up further in. Like, I'm the source of all of these goods. Chase the goods back to the sun. God is the sun, but these are sunbeams, and you should chase them back. So that Lewis point there, and I think the book of Lewis is on this that probably had the biggest influence on Things of Earth is actually Letters to Malcolm, which is his last book, or one of the last books that he wrote. I think it may have been the last one that was published, I think, after he died. It's on prayer, but in this sort of fictional set of letters between
Chiefly on prayer.
There's other things besides prayer, but in that he's regularly sort of doing sort of Things of Earthish stuff, talking about you mentioned in the open about the problem we have of sort of spiritual blessings, and I think this is actually one of like the most practical aspects of what I'm trying to do with this is if you try to go from wherever you are and you want to be grateful to God for every spiritual blessing that we have in Christ. I think that a lot of times people struggle to get off the ground, right? They know I ought to be up there. I ought to be rejoicing in my adoption and in the redemption that I have and all of those sort of things. I want to get there, but my heart's just not there. And so Lewis says, what should you do if you're faced with that scenario where you're not able to adore God on the highest occasions, you're not able to worship him for the greatest gifts in the cross and the gospel and so forth. And Lewis, his counsel is begin where you are. Like start with what's right in front of you. Don't try to jump straight from your present circumstances to the heights of spiritual glory. Instead, what are the manifest, physical, obvious, simple things that you can be grateful for that are undeniable and that are sort of pressing on you? Give thanks to those. Give thanks for those small gifts and see if it doesn't sort of begin to stir your heart. And then it's sort of like you can build up. It's the on-ramp. So gratitude for Lewis is gratitude in small things is sort of the on-ramp to worship and adoration. That's Lewis. That's one of the main insights I picked up from Lewis is that gratitude is the on-ramp to worship.
This is what Peterson is doing as well in the song that I quoted in the opening. It's a recognition of all the beautiful, marvelous, glorious things in our world, and that impulse they excite in us to then turn around and thank someone. That's the sort of on-ramp we take. And it speaks to me very deeply too, Joe, because as a kid, I had this experience that was, I guess, somewhat analogous to the experience that Lewis semi-autobiographically describes in like Pilgrim's Regress, where you have this Puritania sort of presentation of the things of God, right, of the landlord. And it seems extraordinarily detached from the things that actually give you joy and excitement in life, which for me was like bugs and shark teeth and the ocean. And for Lewis was the joy or the northernness that he chased in his real life, or the side of the island in Pilgrim's Regress. And so there's this joy, and he feels it and he wants to pursue it. But then there's all these religious people who are saying, no, you have to, excise the joy and the pleasure from your life and don't follow that stuff because you're actually supposed to just worship the landlord and enjoy it. And this comes to a head in moments like, what N.T. Wright describes back in his book, Surprised by Hope, where he caricatures the image that most Christians have of heaven as this just sort of sitting around perpetually playing harps on clouds. And it's like, I confess, this is not appealing to me. This does not sound like a way that I want to spend all eternity. I really like this world. I like food. I like sex. I like being married. I like music. I like art. I like all the beautiful things that God's made in his world. How do we reconcile those? And so it seems like to me, your project is this answer to someone who's sitting at that crossroads and going, oh my goodness, what do I do? Because Christianity says I got to follow this to my supposed to be my true joy, God, but I love all this stuff. How do you keep from sinning at that point? What decision do you got to make?
Yeah, that's right. And so in that Letters to Malcolm section, he talks about, he goes even more basic, and he just says, look, pleasures are shafts of the glory of God as it strikes our senses. And he says, the glory of God, when it strikes different faculties of the human person, we give it different names. So when the glory of God strikes our mind, what's the word for that? And we say truth. When the glory of God strikes our will, when it impinges on our will, we call it goodness. When the glory of God strikes our senses, what do we call it? And then we call it pleasure. And so pleasures, like little pleasures, little p, plural, are expositions of invitations to the ultimate glory, which means you can't deny them in this total sense. So Lewis has a real note. He does have notions of self-denial. I mean, we can talk about that. Like, what is a Christian vision of self-denial? But he wants to start with, this is a good thing that's meant to lead you back to God. Every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights. And then my little addendum to that is, and every good and perfect gift is an invitation to come up to the Father of lights. It comes down from him and is meant to lead you back to him. He's the father of lights. That's the sunbeam. Chase it back to the source. This is where I think Christians go wrong is, well, if I can have the sun, why would I keep the sunbeams? And it's like, well, you can't get to the sun without the sunbeams. God's not built the world that way. The Bible passage that often does this for me, it's the sort of paradigm that I come back to again and again, is in the book of Proverbs. I think it's in Proverbs 24. I always forget actually which particular text. Solomon says, eat honey, my son, eat honey, for it is good. And the drippings of the honeycomb are sweet to your taste. Like this is an exhortation. It's in the Bible. Eat honey just because it's good and it's sweet. And then he says, know that wisdom is such to your soul. And it's a simple, obvious point, but there's two exhortations in that proverb: eat honey and know that wisdom is such to your soul. And you cannot obey the second one unless you've obeyed the first. It's impossible. Like there's no way for you to know wisdom is like this to my soul unless you've actually eaten honey simply because it's good. You don't have the categories. You don't have the experience. You can't get there. So actually last year at Thanksgiving, Desiring God had me write a little reflection on this. And I did a little dialogue, sort of Socratic dialogue, fictional with my son. And it was on honey and like what this amazing, where does honey come from? How does it work? And it's all about bees and flowers and nectar and how honey is glorified nectar, right? So nectar is what's in flowers. Honey is glorified nectar. Well, nectar is actually glorified water. So plants just pull up water from the roots and they have photosynthesis. The magic process that glorifies water and turns it into nectar. Bees come along and eat it and eat the nectar, and it goes into a stomach, and honey's actually like bee vomit, which is just crazy, just this crazy thing. They actually digest it, and then they go back and they spit it up, and it's purified, it's glorified. Nectar is glorified water, honey's glorified nectar. Well, does the glorification continue after honey? And the answer is yes. How does that happen? Well, it's when a human being eats honey because it's good, and then the glorification is God is like this. It's the mind and the heart of a human being that takes honey and glorifies it, meaning takes it to another level, one degree of glory to another. What's honey for? Well, the word of God is sweeter than honey. The word of God is more precious than silver, more valuable than gold, and it's sweeter than honey. And so you're supposed to eat the honey and then go, God is better. God is like this, but better. That's how you take honey from one degree of glory to another.
This is why I love so much that you take the book immediately back to creation and ask a bigger question than what do we do with earthly pleasures. You ask, why did God create? Why did he make us in the first place? Well, it was this overflow of his own generosity and glory and joy and his desire within the Trinity for self-glorification and to express his love for himself by the mediation of creatures. And then once you get that sorted, a lot just falls into place. So you've got this question of like, why are we embodied creatures? That's a good question. Why is it that we aren't just disembodied souls in a state of immediate sort of exalting of God's glory? Well, there's something happening here that's mediating between us and that delivery of praise and glory. And it's these bodies. It turns out these bodies are like emblematic of all of creation. There's something here that testifies to is a microcosm, if you will, of everything that's going on out there, including the bees and the honey and the stars. And so the question becomes much bigger than why can't we just get straight to God? It's why did God make it so that we have to go through means to get to him? I just love that. It's so powerful.
Yeah, it is, right. It's, Lewis, again, this is letters from Malcolm. Creation is delegation through and through. God will do nothing of himself that he can possibly do through others. So the whole principle of creation is, was God content? Was he happy in and of himself apart from creation? And all Christian theology says, yes. He didn't need the world. It was no necessity, no compulsion. He didn't have to create. He could have simply enjoyed himself. But like you said, an overflow of generosity. It was fitting, appropriate, given his own joy, that he would glorify himself by creating a world like this. And infinite wisdom said, this is the way it ought to be. This is the kind of world, one with bodies and souls, one with trees and honey and companionship and all of these goods. That's the kind of world that God said, this is going to be the best way for me to communicate who I am and what I'm like to creatures who I don't need, but who need me. So that's the Edwards point. So the Edwards stream of the Things of Earth River is the why did God make the world? And I actually recently, Davenant Press just published a little exposition of Edwards' treatise, The End for Which God Created the World, that I wrote, which is sort of like the deepest sort of philosophical, theological foundation for all this stuff. Why did God make the world? And then but it was that stream which then produced, then we should pay attention. What is God doing in all of these things? And how does the Bible talk about it? How does the Bible say, the heavens declare the glory of God, consider the lilies of the field, consider the birds? All of these things are audiovisual aids so that we can understand who God is and what he requires of us. This is the kind of world he made. And therefore we ought, the funny way I try to say it in the book is, don't try to be holier than God.
Lewis says, don't try to be more spiritual than God.
Yes. Don't try to be more spiritual than God. Don't try to be holier than God. Accept the way, like, he knows better than you. And so how does he want you to live in light of all these? Now, the sin thing's a real thing. So idolatry is a real danger, but it's not where you have to start with the goodness of creation and the goodness of the body and the goodness of the way God made us. And then how did sin corrupt it, distort it? You can get into that.
I'm talking today with Dr. Joe Rigney, Fellow of Theology at New St. Andrews College, about Thanksgiving and treasuring God by enjoying his gifts. We'll be right back. We're back on Upstream talking with Dr. Joe Rigney about the theme of Thanksgiving and the central role God's gifts play in the Christian life. Joe, there's two hymns that sort of set up the discussion in Things of Earth, two well-known and well-beloved hymns. Everyone listening will have heard these and often sung them in church, probably. Actually, one of them is where you get the title of the book, and it's the Things of Earth. So turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. And then the other one is my favorite, actually. This is my Father's world, which has this verse where it says, this is my Father's world. He shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass, I hear him pass. He speaks to me everywhere. So it's this question of, are the things of earth growing strangely dim, or are they growing strangely bright with the effulgence of God's glory that's refracted through them or comes to us through them? Talk about that tension in hymnody and then where it comes from in Scripture, because it sounds like you're not dismissive of the one stream. You actually kind of want to situate it and qualify it.
That's right. I think so. Helen Limmel's "Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus" is a fine hymn. The challenge comes because the things of earth is an ambiguous phrase. So I think that she's drawing from Colossians chapter 3, where Paul says, set your mind on things above, not on things on earth. I think that's the biblical text that she has in mind. It's the things on earth that grow strangely dim when you set your mind on things above, when you set your mind on Christ. When he shows up, they grow dim. But what does Paul mean by things of earth in Colossians? Well, he tells us, put to death what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, covetousness, which is idolatry. So when Paul's using things on earth in Colossians, he means sinful, corrupt uses of things. So it's not sex that he says is the things of earth. It's sexual immorality. It's not wealth, but it's the inordinate love of wealth, covetousness, the craving after wealth. It's the sinful part that has to die. It's the sinful part that needs to be put to death and that therefore grows dim in the light of his glory and grace. That's true. The flip side of it, though, is the other hymn, He Shines in All That's Fair, which I think is a good representation of he's the Father of lights. Every good and perfect gift comes from him in James chapter 1. Or the other text in Paul that is pretty central is, as for the rich in this present age, charge them, Timothy, not to be haughty, don't be proud, don't set your hope on the uncertainty of riches. Okay, so put to death covetousness, right? But set your hope on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. And it goes on and to share and to be rich in good works and all that sort of stuff. But he starts with everything to enjoy. He's given you these things to enjoy. That's the right use of them, is to enjoy. Set your hope on God, set your mind on things above, worship God rightly, know that he's the greatest treasure, feel it in your bones, and then richly enjoy everything that he richly provides.
So the question that emerges out of that for me is, do we use the concept of things of earth as sinful or corrupted to sort of account for the whole biblical and theological witness on that front? Or is there a valid turning away from the things of earth for the sake of turning away from them? And this is where I think we get into this sort of tension that I still feel between a sort of Protestant moment, like the Thanksgiving feast, right? Which is, and Protestants have always been very like this earth kind of people. Luther immediately made this turn toward glorifying the various vocations other than just the clerical vocations, right? So everyone is serving God by virtue of what they're doing, not just the priests and bishops and so forth. But there's this other current in Christian history that we often associate with Catholicism, which is this ascetic current where we become monks and nuns, we renounce the things of the world, and we actually do deprive ourselves. Where do you see that as a Protestant thinker? What is the place of denying things for apparently just to deny things, or is that not what's going on?
I think it's the monastic error, and I'll call it an error, is basically an absolutizing of a good impulse. So the good impulse is there is a way in which temporarily fasting, this is what fasting is, temporary fasting from earthly goods as a way of stoking hunger for earthly goods. So when you fast from food, you get physically hungry. And then this is the same principle of what's happening with the honey when you eat it. You experience the hunger, and then that gets transposed onto the Lord. Lord, this is the hunger I feel now for food because I'm fasting is what my soul feels for you as the bread of life, as the greatest good, as what my soul is hungry for you, and the way my belly is hungry for food. So fasting, fosters hunger for God when it's done faithfully like that. And I think what the monastic impulse did was take that good biblical principle and absolutize it and make it permanent for some people. So this is what Luther and the Protestants reacted against. It wasn't that should you ever abstain temporarily from sexual activity. It's like, well, Paul says do that. Separate for a while or devote yourself to prayer, but then come together again lest Satan tempt you. It's a temporary separation for the sake of devotion to God, to sort of anchor yourself. God is the supreme good. God is the ultimate goal. We temporarily fast. So fasting could have that stoking hunger. Fasting has a role. I think there's a different sort of function for fasting in terms of repentance. So fasting is often used as sort of alongside repentance in the Bible. And so it's a turning from sin. So that there's a slightly different than just a more positive, I'm doing this to stoke my hunger for God. But in all those cases, they're temporary abstentions. They're temporary denials of your appetites for the sake of devotion to God. But then you break fast, right? You get the good thing back. Then you have the feast. And so my way of trying to thread that needle is to recognize the Bible teaches sort of that we live in light of rhythms. So there are times when we feast, there are times when we fast, there are times when we abstain, there are times when we partake, and that temporary abstentions are meant to serve the joy that we have when we get them back. And this is again where Lewis is really helpful, because he has this notion that like pleasure is just one. There's only the enjoyment of a good is only one form of the enjoyment we can have in the good. There's also a particular pleasure of anticipation. So when you think about Christmas, it's a really good example. Like there is a pleasure in the anticipation. When you're a kid and you're looking forward to it, it's coming, it's almost here, it's almost here. That sort of Advent building of expectation is itself a kind of delight. And then you have the pleasure of the enjoyment. It's Christmas morning, you come tumbling down the stairs, there's all the presents, and there's just the enjoyment. You've waited, you've had that pleasure of waiting and expectation. And now you have the pleasure of enjoyment. It's here. And then Lewis says there's a third kind, which is the pleasure of memory. There's the later recollection, looking back, where you don't have the thing anymore, or you don't have it in the same way, but you're able to look back on, man, wasn't that a great time? And Lewis, there's a great quote, I think he got it from his friend Owen Barfield, where he talks about pleasures are whispers that memory will warehouse as a shout. So like little pleasures, basically, memory warehouses them as shouts. They were whispers when you experienced them. They were small, they were insignificant. You didn't even realize how good it was. And then you get older and you look back and you go, man, what a sweet moment. And it's bigger than it was in the moment because it's grown in your memory, and it's a distinct kind of pleasure. So expectation, enjoyment, and memory are three different sort of modes of joy, and they depend on these rhythms. You have to say, no, we're going to wait. We're not going to have this right now in order to build the expectation. You have to say no to the encore impulse. Lewis calls it the encore impulse, the lust to have things over again right then. I had it. I want to have it again. I want to have it again. I want to have it again right now. And that eventually kills it, right? You gorge yourself, and it's the feeling you can sometimes have after a big feast where you're like, I never want to see food again. What were we thinking? Why did we do this? And I think Lewis would say you've probably gone to excess. There's a difference between sort of the satisfaction that you have when you're full and just, man, that was good. But now I maybe want to take a nap, but I just feel good versus I feel sick. And it's that gorging that he says that was the lust for encore. Have the good, same good over again. Have it over again. And instead, you need to restrain yourself, master your passions, master your appetites, and then now you can enjoy it in memory, and it can become even sweeter. So those are sort of like this rhythms idea of up to God, down into the goods, up to the God, down into the world, up to God. That's the rhythms that our lives ought to be structured by.
There's even a Bible verse handily about, I forget where it is, about eating too much honey and getting sick. It's probably in the Proverbs as well. So even the illustration you've been using is subject to the same kind of problem. And then you'll vomit it up like the bees, but it won't be, thrice glorified. It'll just be
just be vomit.
No one.
That's right. So this is another Edwards. This is Edwards thing. Edwards has a sermon called "Spiritual Appetites Need No Bounds." Spiritual appetites need no bounds. In other words, spiritual appetites can be just unhindered. Like your hunger for God, just let it go. But your earthly appetites need boundaries in order to serve your spiritual appetite. You have to have some restraint because otherwise it's the law of diminishing returns. You gorge yourself and it makes you sick. You can't do it. They're not because they're not God. They're not meant to sustain you in the way He is. They're meant to point you to Him. They're meant to draw you to Him. And so you really should enjoy them, but you can't rest in them. You can't. This is the Augustinian point. You can use the goods. You can enjoy them, little e, but you can't enjoy created goods with a capital E, meaning you can't worship them. You can't place your all satisfaction in them. If you do, they turn to dust. They do grow dim. They do grow. That's the sinful. You got to kill that. You got to put it to death.
Yeah. Every time someone talks about the encore impulse, like trying to, or as Lewis calls it, trying to stay on the same wave in Paralandra, instead of going on to the next one, you stay on the same one, right? He has this again and again. The thing that actually comes to my mind, oddly enough, is from Harry Potter. It's J.K. Rowling's take on the same thing. And it's the Resurrection Stone, where one of the Peverell brothers, right, he tries to bring back his fiance who had died on the eve of their wedding. And she comes back, but she's like this sad, ghostly form, and ultimately drives him into despair, and he kills himself because it's not actually her. He's wanting that encore, demanding it again and again. Same pleasure.
That's right. That's right. And Paralandra is the place in Lewis that he tries to sort of novelize this. Don't just demand the same good. Throw yourself into the next wave. Throw yourself into the next wave. Whatever God is giving. At some level, it's an Ecclesiastes point too, right? This is, the birds taught us, right? Every season, turn. There's a time for this and a time for that. And if you try to make all times the same, the gift goes bad. If you allow the gift to die, then it brings up new shoots. There's resurrection. But don't cling to the old good. Like, allow God to give you the new one.
Right. You were saying just a second ago about how experience whispers and memory shouts, and the thing that immediately my eyes are tearing up because I'm just thinking about my kids. Like, this is the experience that I think you and I will have that most clearly resonates with what you're saying here. That as you experience day-to-day life with your kids, I've heard it said that the days are long, but the years are short. And it really is true that you have these moments with them that you think are just mundane, humdrum, everyday sort of things. And then you look back a few years later, you look at photographs and you think, my goodness, that was the most precious time ever. And those were the good days. And I didn't appreciate them well, but you can still appreciate them in retrospect. And that's just part of the tension of being human. But for me, that raises perhaps the sharpest form of this question about the things of earth, because family is included in that category. People are things of earth. They're part of creation. And the Bible has this language that I think many of us just go, ooh, at, especially if we've centered our lives around family. And that is where Jesus says things like, whoever follows me and doesn't hate father, mother, brothers, sisters, and so forth, is not worthy to follow me, not worthy of the kingdom of heaven. There's this aggressive language of, you have to be so sold out for me that you have to denounce and hate these precious gifts of what we say are precious gifts from God. What do you do with that? And because I think you have a really helpful rubric for sorting this out in the book.
Yeah, so I think these sorts of passages are the sort of comparative tests of whether your love for your family or whatever good is right. We ought to live integrated lives where you enjoy God in everything and you enjoy everything in God. But there is the need for the comparative test. And that's what the hate your father and mother is. It's the whom have I in heaven but you? On earth, there's nothing I desire besides you. So that's not positive hate, but it's just, I don't want any of this stuff. Like, I got God, He's enough. And the Bible teaches us to pray this way. And then suffering comes in to sort of put our money where our mouth is. Do you mean it? Like, if you lose the created good, do you curse God? Do you turn away from God? Or is He enough for you in the loss? So suffering tests this. And then there's sort of the voluntary test where we seek to be generous with others. I think this is crucial. These things are absolutely essential ways that we test whether our enjoyment of created things is right. Is, well, do you cling to it or can you share it? So that's especially when it comes to the food and the wealth and things like that. The basic biblical test is: are you generous, open-handed, ready to share, looking for needs, being a conduit of grace? You've been given it to enjoy, yes, but you don't just sit on it. It's not just about you. Spread it, right? But then when it comes to family, the comparative test is: if you had to choose between God and your family, like if and when you think about when Jesus is speaking, this is precisely what he says is going to be the issue, right? He's speaking to these people, some of whom are going to follow him and some of whom aren't. And he says, in that moment, do you stick with the created good, with your family, or do you hate your family, meaning turn aside from them in order to follow Jesus? Is he more precious to you? And he demands everybody has to do that. Now, in some cases, this is the great blessing, and one of the great kindnesses of God, is that when we say, I'm following Jesus, come hell or high water, I'm in with Jesus, God says, great, your family's coming too, right? So this is like when you think about Pilgrim's Progress as sort of a good example of this, right? There's book 1 and book 2, and in book 1, the pilgrim has to hate his wife and kids because they want him to stay in the city of destruction, and he's got to, I'm following Jesus, I'm going to the celestial city.
Life, eternal life, fingers in his ears. Yeah,
exactly. He does that, and then book 2 is wife and kids are coming too, right? They're along too. Now it's allegory. So in principle, that's what they would be together, journeying together on the way, all saying it's Jesus or nothing. We're all in on Jesus, but we're all in it together. And now there's no need to positively despise or hate or reject your family because they're a part of the good that God is giving you in Christ. But even today, I think the place where this actually shows up, because people talk a lot about the idolatry of the family. That's sort of a trope in evangelicalism, and given birth rates and things like that, it's like maybe we could use a little more of that idolatry of the family. Like it'd be nice if we had Lewis has a great line, I think, in Screw Tape, where he says human beings are always going around with fire extinguishers in the midst of a flood. And so here we are in a childless era with barely, not even replacement birth rates. And everybody's talking about, I think people love kids too much. And it's like, I don't think you're getting it.
Our goal is to fix their approval on the virtue which is nearest to the vice that we're trying to make endemic, is what he says. And that's exactly what's happening. Yeah,
that's right. But the real idolatry of the family happens, and where Jesus' words there in, hate your father and mother, it actually is the coming. I would say if he were speaking today, he would use the familial imagery. He would say it would be hate your son and daughter. Because what often happens is where you see that danger really potent is when you have kids, Christian kids, who all of a sudden begin to drift theologically, and they go woke, they become LGBTQ affirming, they come out as gay, they come out as trans, they go that way, and then the parents now have a choice, Jesus or them, and the parents drift with them. The parents follow the kids into the sexual morality, into the affirmation, into the approval of the sin, rather than hating son and daughter and clinging to Christ. That's the real, and Jesus is speaking right to that and saying, you can't do it. It's me or them in that moment. But God willing, we don't have to make that choice in as stark a way, because God gives us both himself and the kids.
There's something really deep going on here, Joe, in the broader picture of how we look at creation in relation to our love of God and our pursuit of him. And I think the real core of the book and why it's so valuable to me on an ongoing basis and to so many people that I know is that you integrate these two things, right? You acknowledge the legitimacy of the comparative approach and say, yes, if there's a scale with all creation on one side and God on the other, God wins. Hands down, there's absolutely no comparison whatsoever. Creation's like the dust on the scale. But that's not the only way the Bible pictures these things. It also has an integrative way of looking at it. And the reason that's so important is because we're creatures. Could you tell us, kind of sketch the big picture of what's going on here? Because, as I'm reading and rereading the book, I'm thinking big eschatological questions. Like, where are we going? What's the ultimate end of all this? How does Jesus speak into that? Because when we love Jesus, we're not, possible heresy alert here, I'm just going to allow you to do the heresy check. But as we love Jesus, we are loving God, but we're loving him through and in a created nature that he has assumed, right? So we are loving God, but loving a creature at once. So these things are permanently integrated in him. What does it mean for the long term, for our pleasures and our delights in this world?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that the incarnation is sort of the greatest affirmation of the goodness of creation and the abiding goodness of creation that could possibly be. Christ does, this is again a Lewis point, Christ descends down, takes on a human nature, and then brings it and all of nature up with him. In incarnation, in the resurrection, in the transformation of his human nature, we worship the God-man. And so, therefore, we get all things in him. This is the way the Bible talks. All things are yours. Things in heaven, things on earth, future, past, everything belongs to you. Because why? Because it belongs to Jesus and you're in him. That's the ultimate telos. That's new heavens, new earth, resurrection bodies, resurrected cosmos, mountains flowing with wine, all of the stuff. All of the stuff is there. All of the stuff is there. And presumably we'll have capacities and abilities to enjoy it and enjoy God in it in ways that right now we just get little faint foretastes, just like little bitty, we're at the fringes and just getting little tastes. And there we're going to drink joy from the fountain of joy. That's the weight of glory. So in the meantime, I think our task is to live in light of that by cultivating our loves appropriately. So love God supremely, and then don't take the governor off when God gives you the created good. Like gratitude. So back to Thanksgiving, gratitude, Lewis says, right, says, man, how good of God to give me this. But then gratitude is the on-ramp to adoration, which then leads us to say, man, if this is how good this gift is, what must be the quality of that being whose far off and momentary coruscations are like this? Like, what must he be like if this is so good? What must he be like if he's the maker of this and surpasses this in every way? That's the move from gratitude to adoration. And I think that our lives, we worship the Lord on the Lord's Day in order to adore, but our adoration will be thin if it's not, amplified and fed by gratitude, like daily gratitude. God, thank you for this thing. Like if we're not going Godward with thank you for this, no, enjoying it and then expressing gratitude, then our adoration becomes thin, and we want it to be thick and robust because we have something experiential in it.
I got this personal notion that Christians are the only people who really get to enjoy stuff for real and who don't immediately do the encore impulse. And I experience this so often with friends. We're in Florida, right? So this is one thing that's become a focal point of joy and awe for me is the scuba diving thing. So I introduced a couple of friends to this, and we jumped in off the back of the boat, and it's 60 feet down. It's crystal clear. You can see it. This is off the east coast of Florida, West Palm Beach area, and there's a coral reef, right? And we go down and we spend the next 40 minutes just kind of drifting along this thing, seeing all the gorgeous life there that almost no one until very recently in history could ever see. And then the real power of it, though, happened on the return to the boat, and then the sitting at the restaurant afterwards, just talking about what we saw. And it was this realization of we're grasping this stuff on a level that a lot of people, I won't say most, but a lot of people who go down there and look at it from a purely like materialistic standpoint are not grasping it. We're having what my friend called secret joys in these sites. And it's just, this is where I just bristle at the I guess the ascetic impulse that you're describing a second ago. Maybe I'm enjoying this too much. No. Lewis will ruin you forever on this front. You're not enjoying it enough. You need to actually take it back to the God, the Father of lights, who gave those things to you. Then you will be enjoying it for real. It's meant to inspire thankfulness. It's meant to inspire song. If you don't get to that point, you haven't really seen the thing for what it really is. And that's the core of the whole Christian project when it comes to being in creation and then ministering to people who are created.
Mm-hmm. Amen. That's exactly right. And it is the moment when you have am I enjoying this too much? The too much question is always too much relative to what? It's like if God is still supreme, it's impossible, because the higher your joy in the gift goes, the more you enjoyed your family, the more you enjoyed it. Your joy in God goes up correspondingly, right? Like it amplifies it. It pushes. Let it go. Like it's carrying your joy. Let it shoot through the roof. Let it go all the way to the sky, because it's carrying your joy in God with it. don't try to smother it out of some sort of false piety. And then, the test is, you spread it, like share it, like all the good things. Be generous, open-handed, eager to share, ready to invite other people in, not just to the earthly enjoyment, but also to the secret joys, to the pleasures forevermore that God is offering. You say, no, there's more here than you could possibly dream. And we want to be the kind of people. This is what Thanksgiving is. Thanksgiving is a witness, is a testimony to this reality. We worship a good and gracious God who has lavished his goodness upon us in every way. And we set aside one day in America, formally, to say, we want to say thank you to him and look at all the good things around us, but we want to say thank you to him. It's not just we're thanking each other. It's not just we're thanking people. We're thanking God for all of his many kindnesses to us because he is the fountain of all good things.
It's the cosmos. We're thanking the generic impersonal cosmos for our good fortune, Joe.
That's right.
Here's a question that I know you deal with in the book, but many people listening to a discussion like this, if God has placed them in a time of great difficulty or grief or hardship, when the things of earth have been taken away from them, whether that's a job or a loved one or their health, they cannot enjoy that thing that they very much had joy and even centered their whole life around the same way that they once did. What is the proper reaction to that? Because it feels like you've said, and we've said in this conversation, God communicates to us through these things. He gives us these things in order that we would follow them back to him, their means. But what happens when he takes the means away? What are we to do with that?
Yeah, I think this is, what God promises to be for us there is everything we need. It's not, the basic principle here is one I learned when my own father was dying of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, which is it hurts as much as it's worth. And so the pain that you feel in the loss is a testimony to the goodness of the gift, and the goodness of the gift is still a pointer and an invitation to know God. And so you don't deny the pain, you don't squelch the pain, you don't pretend like it's not there, you don't stiff upper lip, stoic it. If it's a good gift, then losing it is painful, and you go into the pain because that's where Jesus wants to meet you. He's a man of sorrows. He's acquainted with grief. He knows. And so you find him in the loss, in the pain, and he promises to be everything we need. If father and mother forsake you, the Lord takes you in. If you lose in this life all of the earthly, houses and mothers and fathers and brothers, sisters, wives, God says, I'm going to give you them back, and in the age to come, eternal life. So it's that promise that you cling to and say, Lord, you're taking this. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away, but I'm blessed be the name of the Lord. I want to follow Job all the way up the mountain into the whirlwind and not stop short and curse God and die. And so I think that's the invitation. Even in the loss, there's opportunity to grow, to have our capacities, our soul to expand, to take in more of God, because our hearts are being ripped apart by the loss of the good thing that God had given.
This is what's so striking to me about the Thanksgiving story itself, right? About the first American experience in a, I guess, limited Protestant scope, because there was some kind of Catholic Thanksgiving done here in St. Augustine at some point. But in the typical canon American story, we're looking at the separatists who came over to Massachusetts and started this ill-fated colony. And it was very ill-fated because the first winter they spent there, something like half their people died. It was just an enormous catastrophe for them. And here they are, beginning of the second winter, they're sitting there, they've invited the natives, and they're having this feast, and they're giving thanks to God of all things for bringing them through. I guess that was maybe the second winter that they'd come through the second winter, thanks to the help, but I need to go back and review my history. But anyway, they just lost a bunch of people, right? And there's such tension there because these people are grieving, these people are bereaved, these people have lost so much of what, structured their lives and people they loved, and yet they're giving thanks to God. It seems to me like we're not made of such fine metal. Modern people just don't have that same. Something has gone awry in us, perhaps due to our luxury or our ease, the fact that we don't die of these childhood diseases and stuff, or cold weather that has left us soft. And I guess I want to hear some kind of like closing admonition, no pressure, but something that'll help us to think more like the kinds of people who could give thanks to God in that Job-like fashion, even amidst horrible, loss and bereavement, because we still see that in the world today. It hasn't gone away.
Yeah. Well, if your listeners are playing their bingo, here we go. So the bingo would be the words of King Loon of Arkenland to his son about what it means to be a king. So I'll issue the exhortation to dads especially. This is what it means to be a king: to be first in every desperate attack, to be last in every desperate retreat. And here's the part that's relevant for your question. And when there's hunger in the land, as must be now and again in bad years. So there's going to be times when there's hunger in the land, when things are going wrong, when there's an empty chair at the table. When there's hunger in the land, as must be now and again in bad years. What should you do on Thanksgiving? Well, you should wear finer clothes and laugh louder at a scantier meal than any man in your land. That's the fundamental call for dads in those moments, is to lead their family in the joy, in the laughing loudest, in the gratitude, even when the meal is scanty and the fig tree. It's the Habakkuk text, right? When there's no fruit on the vine, when the flocks are not in the fold, when the stalls are empty, when everything is gone. What does Habakkuk say? Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. And so dads, you're the leader there. You're the one who's called to lead there on Thanksgiving and every day, but to be first in, last out, and laughing loudest.
Absolutely. Rich stuff. My guest today has been Dr. Joe Rigney, Fellow of Theology at New St. Andrews College, and author of several books, including my favorite, Things of Earth, Treasuring God by Enjoying His Gifts. Joe, thank you so much for your wisdom and careful thinking on this topic over the years, and for giving us permission to taste and see that God is good.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Upstream is a program of the Colson Center. When it comes to the hardest questions we ask, we have thousands of years of accumulated wisdom from which to draw, from a faith that is the explanation of all reality. So come upstream and learn to understand the world, the church, and the God who has placed you in them. Be sure to rate the podcast and subscribe in your listening app. You can also connect with us on social media or by visiting upstream.colsoncenter.org.